Jesus' encounter with the Roman centurion brings us today to the topic of power, of leadership, and authority. The more that I see in our world today with leadership and authority, the more troubled I get. We are experiencing a serious crisis of leadership and authority in the world as we look around. More often than not, we see bad examples of leadership and the use of authority than we do the examples of good leadership and using authority for its proper purposes. As I look at our world, as I look at our country, there are a lot of things that trouble me in a way where I wonder where things are headed. As we look at the world around us, as we look at the use of authority, we see that our Congress has a popularity rating of less than 20%. Why is it that less than 20% of the country thinks they're doing a good job or approves of what they're doing? Because time and time again, we've heard stories of how that authority, that power that's been entrusted to them by the voters has been abused and used to oppress the people. And all too often, we hear them making laws, new laws that are to serve and protect the people, when in reality it's more just to line their pockets. And then as we look at and see examples of leadership and authority in our world, we see that all too often there are those who are set over us to lead us, to inspire us, to help us. That all too often, from our elected leaders to those in law enforcement, to those education officials who have an attitude that says, do as I say, not as I do. Every second, $37,000 is being added to the national debt. We're now approaching $16 trillion of a deficit, of a debt in our country. And we throw that word trillion around like it's nothing, when the reality is that if in our own lives we ran our households and our budgets in the same way, we would be on the fast track to bankruptcy and living in a cardboard refrigerator box. And as we continue to look at authority, we see that time and time again, we have become accepting of scandals. The scandal of the month now is the IRS scandal. But what's disturbing is that it's almost there's become a malaise among the people where there's a ho-hum attitude that just expects there to be a scandal for somebody who's going to lead us and to guide us, because that's the way things are. And if things don't change soon, what we used to hold as being important, as we used to look up and respect, will soon be lost. Unless you think I'm unfairly biased about this topic, let me bring it a little closer to home. In the epistle lesson, we heard St. Paul writing to the church of Galatia, a church that he began. And as we heard him begin that letter in the reading just a few moments ago, we heard him getting deeply upset. His words were filled with emotion because he was so disturbed. And the reason that he was disturbed is because the leaders of the church at Galatia had begun to add new stipulations, new rules and requirements for those who wanted to become followers of Jesus. And this is what they were doing. They were saying that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, especially the grown adult males, that in order to become followers of the way, followers of Jesus, they had to become circumcised, or God wouldn't accept them. Think about this for a minute. Grown males having to go back and get circumcised. What St. Paul was so upset about is that those leaders of the church who had been entrusted with the power and the authority to proclaim the gospel, what should have been a free gift of God's grace, all of a sudden now they were tying strings to it. And nearly 2,000 years later, we see the leaders of the church still struggling with the same type of issues. A recent Pew Research report shows that in the last 5 years, the number of people in America who do not affiliate with any type of religion has grown from 15% to 20%. And among people that are younger than 30, that number is now up to 33%. 1 out of 3 adults younger than 30 has no room for God. Now, I know there's probably a variety of different reasons and factors that contribute to this, but in my opinion, probably the biggest factor is the problem and the crisis of leadership that happens in the church. All too often we hear stories of strings, of legalism, of requirements being tied to the free gift of the gospel of Jesus Christ. All too often we hear how the abuse of authority and the abuse of power in the church has led to scars and to deep trouble within the life of God's people. And all too often, the mission of the church to go and make disciples of all nations is undermined by bad news and horrible publicity. It seems more and more we have less and less to look up to trust in, to aspire to in our world. And where are we going to turn? That's where Jesus' encounter with the Roman centurion and his response to the centurion is so important and so powerful for us today. For in the centurion, in the humility of the centurion, we see what's important in real authority and in true leadership. That centurion, he was a powerful person. He had been entrusted with a lot of authority. He had been given a lot of privilege to lead. But we see, and we can deduce from the text, that he didn't use it for his own personal advantage. He didn't use it to lord it over the people. We heard that the Jewish elders respected him. That was no easy task back then. In order for them to respect him, he must have respected them and taken care of them. We heard that he cared about this slave, cared about somebody who was younger, under him, somebody who back in that time was just considered property, easily to be discarded, but not with this slave. But most importantly, the centurion understood his place in the universe. Even though he had the power and the lordship over other people, he understood that there was a divine power over him to whom he was subject. So much so that when he heard that Jesus was coming, he said that he was not worthy to have Jesus come under his roof. Not to come near his presence. He didn't want that. Instead, just say the word so the servant would be healed. And in that example of the centurion, we see what is so often lacking and missing in our world, which so often has an abuse of authority and a crisis of leadership. Even though the world has become more sophisticated and more complicated, in the humility, the respect, the compassion, and the love of the centurion, we see so often what is missing. And if more and more leaders in our world would hold to those characteristics, the easier it would be for the world to look up to its leaders. But ultimately, what is at the heart of true leadership and true authority is what Solomon was talking about and working towards in the Old Testament lesson today. Solomon had overseen the building of the temple. And we had heard that the motivation that was in Solomon's heart was that he wanted the world to see not just the people of Israel, but the world to see that the God of all creation welcomed and brought foreigners into his presence. Solomon said, "For they shall hear of your great name, your mighty hand, and your outstretched arm, when a foreigner comes and prays towards this house." That's the difference. We live in a world of temporary authority, a world where authority is held by imperfect, sinful people. We're never really going to receive the respect, the leadership, the authority that we really need in the things of this world. That's why we look to the authority and the hand of God over us. For his authority is eternal. It was before all time, and it will continue beyond the limitations, the temporary authority of this world. And his authority is rooted in mercy and grace and love. That's why the life, the death, the ministry, and most importantly, the resurrection of Jesus is so important for us. Because we see an example of true authority. And we have real power in our lives. In him, we see that at the heart of true power is love and service. We see in him that true leadership values the least of all the people. That's who we are. Broken, sinful creatures. But our God, who loves us, gave everything for us. And in him we see that true authority and power is not in abuse and subservience, but it's in service and sacrifice for others. In Christ and what he does for us, we have true leadership and true authority. And in him, we have what we need to deal with the crisis of leadership and authority that we face in this world. We live with and stand up against the abuses of authority that surround us in this world, but we stand firm on the eternal authority and the mercy and generosity of our God who created us. Amen.
Amen.